Hi, I am joined today by the fabulous Sally Nicholls. I think we've managed to time this interview really well, because we just found out today that Things a Bright Girl Can Do, which you can see in front of you, has just been shortlisted for the 2019 CILIP Carnegie Medal. So many congratulations! Thank you for taking time out today to come and talk to us. We've got a few questions, so if you're happy, we'll just get straight into it. Last month we met with Jo Cotterill, and she had a question for you. She wanted to know, lots of your novels feature real historical events and characters. What event or person from history that you have not yet written about would you really like to?
This is a really interesting question. What often happens to me is I find stories and sort of go, oh, that sounds like there's a book there, and then sort of think about it and go, maybe that's not the book for me. So one that I came across recently was in Japan. They had this whole thing. I think it was in the 19th. I should have researched this more. I think it was in mid 19th century where they sent this this group of Japanese people to America and to Europe to try and kind of swat up on modern life, really, and industrial life and all this sort of, and they were mostly sort of adults and scientists and things, and they also sent this 6-year-old girl whose father was just a bit like, yes, educated. So she spent her whole childhood and adolescence in America until she was 18, and then she came back to Japan, which was at that point still a very rigid kind of feudal society, very few rights for women, and she found it very difficult going back to Japan and being expected to sort of counter to everybody. And she ended up setting up a school for sort of one of the first girls' schools in Japan, and being she was a real kind of forward thinker in education for girls in Japan. And I sort of feel like I feel like it's sort of half, what Katie did type. Little Women, sort of American Victorian girls story. And then it's part this sort of feminism story of coming back. But I just kind of look at it and sort of think, goodness, she starts when she's 6, and then it ends when she's like an adult, and and I don't know anything about feudal Japan, and I don't really know an awful lot about Victorian America, and she was a real person who wrote things in Japanese, and do you know what I mean? You just sort of look at it and sort of go, that sounds like an amazing story, but how does one turn that into, and how does one turn it into a children's novel as well? I mean, you can see turning it into biography is one thing, but turning it in a book for young adults, there are constraints of the genre that don't always work.
So it's bubbling away.
It's
not lost. It's just.
That's just one example. There are various things like that you sort of think about and you go, ooh, I'm going to keep that in my head, and then it just kind of sits there until you find a handle on it and figure out how you can turn this quite messy, complicated real life that doesn't fit neatly into standard narratives, and work out how you would tell that as a story if you were going to.
I think I might stick with research, because previous guests have had very differing approaches to the role that research plays. As you do tend to write sort of find historical settings and about real people, can you tell us a little bit about how you the role that research plays and how you do it?
I mean, it has to play a big role. I think I tend to, for a big topic like this, I would tend to start with a sort of quite broad history, history of the thinking about what's the history of the suffragette movement and that kind of thing. And then footnote chase, because writers will generally have a couple of books that they refer to a lot. They crop up a lot in the footnotes, and you sort of think, this has obviously been. So one of the books I read was a sort of broad history of the East London suffragettes, and it just kept referring back to Sylvia Pankhurst's autobiographies, and I sort of went, okay, well, these are obviously the places where they've got most of their research from. let's go and follow up those. I'm quite unusual amongst historical writers that I find the research quite hard. I know it's weird. Most of the historical writers I know will just spend like years of their life in archives looking at pictures of dresses and stuff. And I'm interested in the stories, and I'm interested in the flavour, and I'm interested in the people, but I find the sort of ploughing through histories quite dull. So I tend to read a lot of novels as well, partly because that's a way of getting a sense of how people spoke. I mean, one of the things I had the most fun with and things about Calcutta too, as you could probably tell, is everyone dotting about having a jolly good lark and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, that was just enormous fun to do. So I read all these Edwardian school stories and sort of Edwardian good, and just kind of you get a sense of how people think as well, because we all have these ideas of what an Edwardian lady is like or what a Victorian lady is like, and actually they often aren't that, or they are like that, but there's a variety of difference. I mean, in the same way that somebody looking at the 21st century would probably say, oh, there's an awful lot of, anti-Islamic feeling in 21st century Britain. Well, there is, but that doesn't mean that your character is going to be anti-Islamic. And actually, there are many people who aren't, and I find that really abhorrent. And that's one of the interesting things about things a bright girl can do, is just how many different opinions there were. There were people who were just kind of took it for granted that the war was a necessary act of well, not even just patriotism, but just you're dying to save your country, you're dying to save your family. One of the books I read was Cotterill of Ingleside, which is one of the Anne of Green Gables books. I think it's possibly the last one chronologically, and it's about Anne's youngest daughter, who is, I think, 15 or 16 when the war breaks out, and it's her, and they're all very much like, it's our duty to go and die for our country, and there's a kind of pacifist character who's very vilified in the village, and this is just sort of taken for granted. And then you read someone like Sylvia Pankhurst, who is sitting there the day that war is declared, going, this is a disaster, this is going to be, what are these people doing? They're celebrating this thing that's going to, there's a scene in the book where May goes out to witness to wait for the clock to strike 11, which is when they know whether the war is, they're going to be at war or not. And that was taken from one of the non-fiction books I read, and they have a scene where they're in Trafalgar Square, and half Trafalgar Square is this big rally on the importance of protecting plucky little Belgium, and then on the other side there's this little anti-war rally saying, what are you guys doing? You're all going to die. Like, this is a really bad idea. And the version of the First World War that you get taught in secondary school is that everyone was signing up on the first day of the war, and actually that if you go and read historical accounts, you realise there was a much broader spread.
So the research helps with the sort of the humanising and and helping others, some modern students understanding a number of different viewpoints that they meant across, rather than just historical facts.
And what would be a plausible thing for a character of that time to think? I mean, there's George Orwell has another one. He's talking about his childhood. And he's in one of his essays, and he says the beginning of the war, they were all like, hooray for the plucky, and he's like, by 1917 or 19, they're all sixth formers, and they're all just like, this is so lame, like all this patriotism and hurrah for the war, like these people are kind of very similar to, again, the way we're taught it in schools, that this was this sort of naive king and country, and he's at Eton, and they're just all being like, what the hell are they doing? and that kind of detail that you wouldn't necessarily get from a history book, but about how people, what's a plausible way for a 17-year-old girl to be thinking about these events.
So moving very seamlessly onto the characters. So it's the story of three very distinct characters. Evelyn, Nell and May. What was your inspiration behind them? Do you have a favourite? That's a horrible question.
No. It's an interesting one.
And do you find that was there one that was easier to write than the others?
I mean, the book began as was a book my editor suggested I might like to write. She said, did I want to write a book about this? I forget. So I went, obviously, yes, I would. Where do I sign? And she said she wasn't very interested in synopses. She didn't really like synopses. She said, just like go and write something, it'll be fine. Which is kind of terrifying. When somebody, and she wasn't an editor that I'd written short stories for her, but I hadn't written a novel for her before. She contacted me after a short story I wrote for one of her anthologies, So it was a bit kind of daunting. This idea that I was writing this, and I knew it was going to be a big book.
Yeah.
So we had this lunch where we talked about various things that I thought might be in the book and that she might be in the book. And one of the things she said was, let's have a broad sort of sweep of, let's have a look at the different bits of the of the movement. And I was also aware that that a book about suffragettes is not a plot. Like that's a background.
Yeah.
It's like saying, a book written in a publishing house. That gets you about, that maybe gets you, I don't know, a chapter of plot. And the suffragettes maybe get you like 3 or 4 chapters if you put some hunger strike or a march in. But fundamentally it's not a plot. And that was, when I went and read other novels about the suffrage movement, that was a problem that kept coming up. They just kind of thought, suffragettes is a plot, and it's not. It's a background. So I thought, well, if I have 3 main characters, I only need a third of the plot. Genuinely. I thought, well, I'll have some love stories. That's a nice dumper plot. In Bronze Leslie plot. And I wanted 3 girls for whom being in the suffrage movement was a life-changing experience. It was that they went in the beginning of the book as one person and they came out as somebody else at the other end. And I wanted the catalyst for that to be the suffrage movement. So I wanted characters for whom this would have personal meaning. And this wouldn't just be like, vote for women are a good idea. This would be something that would have a direct personal effect on who they were. So for Evelyn, the idea is that she wants to go to university, and her parents, who are very reasonable people, sort of say, well, this is a very expensive thing to do when it's not actually there aren't actually any careers open. You're going to end up at the end of it being a teacher. Like, you could just go and be a teacher now. And they sort of say very nicely, well, maybe we could pay for a Latin master to come and teach you some Latin if you want to learn things. That would be nice. And so that was kind of her plot line, was this idea. And I was really interested in what the idea of the First World War, that you have these women who have literally devoted their lives, or the past 10 years, 20 years of their lives, 40 years in some cases, to fighting for suffrage, and then suddenly they have to stop and go and support the men. And the different reactions to that, there were very different reactions, and how that would, and obviously it's not, because you're writing about teenagers, it's not quite the same thing, but that I was interested in that. And I knew I wanted a pacifist character, a Quaker character, because I was brought up a Quaker, and they're very proud of Friends Ambulance Unit and all the things that happened during the First World War, and I wanted the peaceful part of the movement to be in there as well. I liked this idea of her kind of representing the peaceful things that happened during the war. Nell is my sort of gender non-conforming character. She spends the whole book in black cap and breeches and this kind of thing. And that, to be honest, was because I just thought that would be brilliant. I was thinking of sort of feminist women, and I had this idea of this girl in male clothes, and I just thought that would be a really interesting character to write, and a really kind of exciting character to write about, and what her life would be like, and someone sort of from the working class. So again, the beginning, it's quite practical questions. We've got the working class suffragettes, we've got the pacifists, we've got even sort of the more traditional story, the more kind of traditional thought of what you'd imagine a suffragette to be like. And I like the idea. I had a feeling that there were probably lots of lesbian suffragettes, which there were, as Annie Kelly, Christabel Pankhurst, who's one of Emmeline Pankhurst's daughters. They were both at least bisexual. With Edwardian women, it's a little bit, people don't come out and sort of state their gender their sexuality, so it's a bit less clear to whether people are lesbians or bisexual. But there was a lot, because these are women who don't necessarily have a home, who don't necessarily have a family or a husband, who've got all this time to devote to the movement. So I like the idea that this could be a transformatory experience. Would be finding a space where that was more allowed. I mean, Nell hasn't even been aware that this is a possible option. These are quite long answers.
Yeah. It's all right.
It's quite a complicated question.
I know.
In terms of favourites in ease to write, Evelyn was astonishingly easier to write than the other two, because she's the upper middle class girl, and if you read Edwardian novels, which I was doing quite a lot of at that point, they're all about girls like Evelyn. They're all about girls who live in families, houses like Evelyn. I felt before I wrote it that I had quite a good sense of what her daily life would be like. I hadn't the slightest idea what Nell's daily life would be like. I mean, working class characters mostly appear as sort of comedy cockneys on the sideline, and I really struggled to find working class writings about working class life, because they don't have the time. You know, Evelyn's class, there are all these vicar's daughters who are sitting at home looking after the household and writing great epic novels in their spare time, whereas girls of Nell's class, they're working in factories, they're working as maids, they're working 12-hour, 14-hour days. They've left school at 14. They don't have the time to write the kind of personal accounts that I really needed. So that just made it harder to get into her head, because you sort of have a vague idea about what her life is going to be like, and then you do a bit of research and discover that you've got it all completely wrong, and that's not what her house looks like, and that's not what her job looks like, and you are having to kind of change who she is based on what you read, and things like how she spoke. I wanted a sort of books written by Cockneys in Cockney, and it turns out that it's not actually possible to write Cockney accurately, because English isn't written to write Cockney. So I found one book over at Set in the East End that was just like, I've talked to lots of experts on this, and it's actually impossible. Like, whatever you do is going to be an approximation. So I think Evelyn was probably my favourite, because she was the most straightforward. A lot of her scenes got written first while I was doing the research on the other two. But it's interesting, seeing other people's responses to it.
Yeah, I was sort of going to ask actually how you weave them together. So each chapter, you move between each character. So did you plot them out separately and then sort of start weaving them together, or was it more of a chapter and go, I think this ties in with this. So
I don't write consecutively, which is why my books have that quite episodic. There's lots of little episodic chapters, and that's just how I've evolved because of that. So I was sitting there writing lots of Evelyn chapters, and then I would think, well, maybe this would work for Nell, or actually I've read something in a book that would be a good scene that May could be involved in. And I was writing the other two at the same time. They just it's just this kind of sprawling Word document of things in a kind of proximate, like this scene probably happens after war's been declared, and this scene sort of probably happens near the beginning, and then you have to spend quite a lot of time.
So as part of the editing process,
moving them, and that's true of almost all the novels. The very short ones, I plot a bit more, because you want them to have chapters that are a nice length to read aloud to a child, so you have to.
So something like Chase in Time.
I did write that non-consecutive, but I sat down and worked out what I wanted to happen in each chapter, which I all want to be about 1,500 words, because parents have a limit to how long they're going to read aloud to their child tonight. And you need to be aware of that. It was quite interesting. YA novels, I think they often have this really strict formula of, here is one chapter in boys' perspective, and here's one chapter. Things like Noughts and Crosses. They have quite a strict formula, and I knew that wasn't going to work. And one of the books I read when I was just beginning to write it was Pat Barker's Regeneration trilogy. If you've read those, wonderful books about wonderful. First of all set in the First World War, And one of the things she does really well is that she has all these different main characters, and they just sort of, sometimes one of them will take centre stage for like 4 chapters, and sometimes one will kind of pop up for half a chapter here and half a chapter there, and they different books will concentrate on, and a trilogy will concentrate on different ones, and it worked really well. And although they are all kind of structured around Dr. Rivers, who's probably the main character, there was a wonderful fluidity about it, that you could say, actually this bit is all about Siegfried Sassoon, so we're going to have a whole lot of chapters about Siegfried Sassoon, and we're just not going to mention the other ones, and then actually now we're going to do this stuff on Rivers, and we're not going to mention Siegfried Sassoon at all because he's gone off to France and we're not interested in him anymore. And it was that was really liberating to kind of go, actually the first half of the book is more about Evelyn, it's about the suffragette movement, but the second half of the book she goes off to university and kind of doesn't do much for a bit, so we're just not going to concentrate on her so much.
Okay, that's interesting. What have you found that modern readers have been sort of most surprised by? Whether they've known it all in it. So.
I mean, a lot of the suffrage stuff, people sort of say, "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know about." There's a whole storyline. About the working class women whose it was a real issue when their men were conscripted. I mean, they were, married men weren't conscripted, but. There was a real issue with reservists. Nell's father was a reservist, so he's called up on the first day of the war and just gets this telegram, and the family just don't get any of his pay for about 6 months because they've got like 50,000 volunteers, and nobody's got uniforms, and nobody's got shoes, and they're all sleeping in barns, and they're frantically trying to make lots of guns, and making sure that the wives get pay. So there's this whole generation of working class women whose main wage earner has just vanished, and all the factories that shut down. There's a big problem in the East End because a lot of they're making produce that's being sold abroad. I mean, people may be noticing kind of parallels with modern issues going on here. But, they've just suddenly lost the European market. You can't sell to the Germans anymore. So Nell works in a jam factory that sells jam to Germany and Belgium and Russia and all these places where suddenly you're not selling jam to the enemy, and they just go, well, the factory's shut. All the men have joined up. The governor's joined up. We haven't got a market anymore. And there were just these whole swathes of women who were suddenly left destitute. And this was a properly like whole streets where nobody had any work. And you just don't hear that, because the story you hear is the upper class men who are all striding off to do their duty, and women's history, and particularly working class women's history. Like I didn't know any of that. It wasn't something that had even occurred to me would be an issue. Again, things people might feel are particularly pertinent to modern life, and just that kind of like, and a lot of people have said that to me, and sort of decided the suffragists. There's the suffragettes are the violent ones who are setting fire to pillar boxes, and the suffragists are the more peaceful ones who are going on marches and stuff. And history tends to concentrate on the suffragettes because they're just cooler. You could write about somebody writing a petition, or you could write about people, blowing up people's houses, like obviously. So the suffragists kind of get written out of history a bit, and actually there were far more. So they were much bigger organisation. They'd been going for 40 years longer. They were the kind of respectable side of. So a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, I'm in favour of women getting the vote, but I'm not really in favour of blowing up pillar boxes." Understandably.
They've got a light.
Yes. And so a lot of people were kind of saying, "This is nice to have a book that acknowledges that actually they were a really tiny part of the movement."
So, thinking a little bit about young Sally, what interested and inspired you as a child, and what creatively inspires you now?
I was quite an old-fashioned child. I grew up in my mother's house full of books. So I was all about sort of Plankton and Arthur Ransom and Noel Stratfield. I sort of wanted to live in the 1940s, I think, really, in woolly jumpers, and maybe this is why I'm still writing historical fiction. And, I thought it was horrendously unfair that at 9 I wasn't allowed to just go off and camp on the moors for a week. Send my mother the occasional telegram to tell her I was still alive, and track down smugglers. I just thought this was completely, this thing thrived, didn't it? They think they sent a postcard like halfway through the book, maybe once if they'd remembered. And I don't think their parents ever had any sort of relationship with them really, which I thought that was just clearly how one should spend on summer holidays. And my mother was less impressed with that. And that, I do. It's nice to. I think it's a really interesting as writing for children that you have to have this awareness of the books that are being published nowadays, of which there are lots of really amazing things. Writers like Frank Cotterill Boyce, William Mackay, all these fantastic books that you read them and think, oh yeah, I want to write something like that. And also the memory of the books that lit you up as a child, and going, oh, I want to write a book that just sitting in a beanbag with a stack of Mallory Towers, and just like, I'm not going to move from this beanbag. I mean, I would talk about things a bright girl can do. I always say it's Little Women with lesbian snogging, roaches, and police brutality. That
didn't make it onto the back.
It didn't. No. But I mean, this is a very conscious harking back to those Edwardian, because a modern young adult books, there's a kind of sense that you've got to have a character who's slightly older than your reader. You've got to have you can't really write about going to university and things like that. They tend to have quite relatively short time. It's rare to get a YA novel that takes place over longer than about a year. I mean, most are like 6 months or something like that. Whereas the books that are being written at the time, Willow Ingleside is 4 years. Little Women, they're married with small children by the end of it. Anna Green Gables starts when she's 11 and ends when she's like 18. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Emily, what the Emily ones are called. Anyway, there's all these kind of the kind of standard is this sort of longer narrative about a child turning into a woman, really, and that I wanted it to feel like this one. I wanted it to feel like an Edwardian children's book written by somebody who is interested in the preoccupations of modern teenagers, who is able to put, an Edwardian children's book wouldn't have lesbian sex in it. It wouldn't have the graphic descriptions of. Well, it might have graphic descriptions of hunger. So they surprise you sometimes. The stuff that comes up in them. One of them I read for. I'm doing a Victorian Christmas at the moment. One of the later Chase and Time which is all lashings of holly and charades and thing. And one of the books I was reading for that was 6 Cousins, Rose in Bloom, and she's got a description of one of the characters dying of alcoholism and things like that. It's quite occasionally they really surprise you. Okay. But it's a real. It's one of the things I think is interesting about writing historical fiction is that you are writing about the past for a modern reader. Yeah. So you want something that is true to the lived experience of the past, while also being compatible with the sensibilities and the experience and the interests of the present. I mean, no one is going to want to read a book about character who learns how important it is for women to dampen down their ambition and give up their writing dream and stay at home to nurse their dying parents, as it's apparently considered okay for Jo March to do until she finds a man, in which case it's fine for her to go off and get married. I mean, just those it's okay to put those sentiments in a modern book, but they I think would need to be challenged through modern perception. Otherwise, modern readers are just going to think, why is this character doing this? Why is this the message that this book is trying to get across?
Thank you. what are your top 3 tips for writers? Aspiring writers.
Aspiring writers. Oh, well, I mean, quite boringly, you will probably get everybody saying this, is to read. Yes. I'm sure everybody has said that.
But it's so true.
It is true.
So
It is true. I mean, so if you want to write horror films, then probably go and watch horror films. If you really want to write soap operas, then, watch as much EastEnders as you want to. Like, this is, immerse yourself in the genre. If you want to be a slam poet, go to poetry slams. It's not just, I'm talking as a novelist when I say read. But you need to know the genres that you're into. And actually, when you're a teenager, you need to read widely as possible, and go to as many poetry slams, and because you are still finding out who you are as a person, and you are finding out what language can do. You don't have to write Shakespeare or Milton, but knowing that sort of writing is possible is giving you another kind of thread in your melody.
Yeah.
I mean, I say this, I couldn't write anything at all like Milton, and I've never tried, but I have read Paradise Lost. And I mean, you wouldn't have his dark materials without that.
Yeah.
So that's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one, I think, is people say write what you know, and I don't say that. I say write what excites you, write what you love. Write about the things that make you come alive as a person, the things you want to read about, the things you want to, and it doesn't, so if you are a plumber, you don't have to write a novel about plumbing, but you could write a novel about the guy who's a plumber in space, maybe, and actually if you can, like Neville Shute is one of my favourite writers. He's interested in aeroplanes, so there's an awful lot of aeroplanes in his books. But they will be people stuck on aeroplanes who've got this aeroplane's going to crash at any minute, and he's got to figure out how to get the aeroplane to stop flying before they all die, and this sort of stuff. It's taking it, and if you can. Partly that makes it easier to research if you're interested in what you're researching. But if you can fill the book with what makes you passionate about this subject, you will be surprised by how that will carry readers along. You wouldn't have thought that the book It's Not Paradise Lost would be a bestseller, but Pullman says, no, this is interesting, and this is why it's interesting, and you go, oh, actually, okay, that is interesting. You don't need to look at the books that are doing well. I mean, it's useful to have a look at the books that are doing well, but you want the books that you can make come alive, I guess. And third one, I think write the books that are true to yourself and your lived experience. So look at the books that you wish somebody else had written. Look at the books that you would have liked to have read. Look at your experiences and say, well, actually, falling in love wasn't like that for me, or being a teenager wasn't like that for me, or my experience of being a human being. These are the questions that I want answers. My first book was all the questions that I thought, nobody asks these questions and nobody answers them, and I don't have answers to them, but it's a way to live forever. Maybe there's a way of maybe just the act of asking them is worth doing in itself. And write a book that is honest. You can have pigs fly, but if you don't explain what happens to the pig poo, then then the book doesn't come alive. And actually, maybe the interesting thing about the book is what the dairy farmers do, and what the British Airways do about it. It's those are the you can make up the magic, but you need to get the heart of it.
as you know, we've been asking each author to pose a question to the next, and we're really excited. We're going to be sitting down with Jill Lewis in a few weeks' time. So what is your question to Jill?
Jill's books are all about animals and conservation issues. So my question to Jill is, if somebody presented you with £1 million to use on conservation work, what would you do with it?
What would you do with it? Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for coming in. You can follow us on Twitter, which is at Oxford Ed English, and also Sally, you're on Twitter as well.
I am, yes.
At Sally_Nicholls.
Yes, that's it.
We've also got a Facebook page and a group called Oxford Reading Hive for secondary schools, where we would share these videos, and we also put up resources for schools who want to set up book groups within their school. So thank you for coming in and talking to us about this amazing book, and we've got our fingers crossed for you for the announcement. Thank you.